Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us later in the day. To begin with, how many of you have actually said this to someone else? Correlation is not causation. OK. So this talk is for you. You're in the right room then. How many of you have heard this from someone else when you were trying to prove something? It's a fairly common thing to say, but sometimes we treat the relationship between correlation and causation in a way that does make us question if it's actually OK to have correlation. And so today we want to explore this topic with you, giving you an example of how we attributed things related to customer happiness and customer engagement at Atlassian, and why correlation may actually not be a bad thing in absence of causation. Let's see if the clicker works. All right, amazing. As Martin, our MC, mentioned, Ramil and I here represent Atlassian. And hopefully you have heard about Atlassian before. It is a big enterprise software provider, and it's hard to find an organization today or a person in this room who has not at least heard about Atlassian products. But the company has been around for quite a while. It was founded in 2002, and it actually has a lot of products. Most of you folks have heard about Jira, Confluence, Trello, but Atlassian today has over 15 products, and it has over 8,000 employees worldwide, as well as over 230,000 customers. However, one fun thing about Atlassian that you may also have heard about is that it's a giant company that doesn't have a traditional sales team, which means that in order to grow to the current scale of the organization, Atlassian had to heavily rely on user happiness as a source of its growth. Whenever you hear about product-led growth, Atlassian usually comes up as an example. And let's be honest, it doesn't mean that our products are perfect in any way, but it is also impossible to build a business of this scale without relying on customer happiness and really analyzing and understanding how to build products. Well, what that also means that as we think about Confluence, which is the second largest product of Atlassian today, where Ramil and I both work, is we have to think in the same way. And for those of you who are not familiar with Confluence, Confluence was originally known as a corporate Wikipedia or something along those lines. But today it has evolved into what we call a remote-friendly team workspace where knowledge and collaboration meet. And that might sound like quite a lot of words, but essentially Confluence went from documentation to many different use cases that involve knowledge management, project collaboration, company-wide collaboration. A couple of examples of how non-tech teams use Confluence today is many of you know Fixer Upper, the famous movie where a wonderful couple from Texas, Chip and Joanna Gaines, go and renovate various houses and then kind of give them to happy families. Well, Chip and Joanna Gaines use Confluence to document their construction process. Interestingly enough, they only use it on the mobile device because for construction workers, it's easy to do this on an iPad, for example. But so we have a lot of customers who use it in that way, for example. Confluence is also pretty old. The first version, the server version of Confluence, was released in 2004. But then when Atlassian moved into cloud, as many of you know, that introduced other versions of Confluence. And so today we have data center, server, and cloud versions of Confluence. Ramil and I both work on the Confluence Cloud product. And Confluence itself is also used pretty widely. So that whole concept of figuring out how do we deal with user happiness, it also applies massively to us. Finally, about us. So I'm on the product team, and I work on the core user experience of Confluence. Ramil is my partner in crime, and he is on our data science, data analytics team. And he helps me answer all the questions that I may have that may not have an immediate answer about how do we leverage data, and how do we understand insights, and how do we convert those insights into action. So we have fairly substantial teams, and we partner very closely in the whole product development process throughout all stages of it. So with that being said, what you'll hear today in terms of what may be valuable to you is the story of how we tried to operationalize correlation and how we battled that concept of correlation and causation in a situation where we needed to figure out how to make user happiness data actionable. Specifically, we're going to talk about how did we approach identifying the key drivers of customer happiness, of user happiness in Confluence, how we mapped qualitative and quantitative insights, how do we analyze customer behavior patterns and some of our key learnings. Some of them were very non-obvious. And lastly, how did we convert all of this into action? So let's start with the problem. Like I mentioned, the problem is also an opportunity. And this is a chart that illustrates how much Atlassian, in comparison to some of the peer organizations, invests into sales and marketing. As you can tell, not much. Yay bar charts. They really show things like that really beautifully. What that means, however, is, again, that in order to answer questions around user happiness and in order to figure out what to do next, you have to be really certain, and you have to do it in a way that really contributes to this product-led growth, as we like to call it. Now, there are some challenges with user happiness metrics. I think you likely know what the user happiness metrics are, but what I mean specifically are things like CSAT, or customer satisfaction score, NPS, or Net Promoter Score, less known but also used sometimes, CES, which is the customer effort score or consumer effort score, many others. Essentially, what those metrics do, they let a customer, at some point of usage of your product, answer a question or a set of questions, a survey about how much do they like using your product. And that usually comes with like a quantitative part as well as a qualitative part where they can provide you feedback. Now, that is very interesting, and it's an exceptionally valuable piece of data if you're trying to understand your customers, but there are multiple problems with that. First, the signals that you get from customers through collection of such data are direct signals. But as many of you know, sometimes people think that they tell you what they want, but they actually don't. And using and relying only on the qualitative insights in product development is sometimes challenging because you don't have the full picture. In addition to that, when somebody asks you, how do you feel about product, guess what? You're not only driven by the actual kind of cognitive feeling. Well, I guess cognitive feeling is not really a thing, but I just made it a thing. But you also are driven by some non-rational factors. So, for example, you might have just gotten an interaction with a support agent that didn't go well, and you're frustrated by it. And so you see a lot of noise, essentially, in the data around customer satisfaction and customer happiness. Lastly, when we think about what may be wrong with the interpretation of those data points, they measure essentially different duration and different scope. So what I mean by this, when you ask a customer, hey, how was using this feature, what they're answering about applies to this particular moment and this particular capability. However, when you collect multiple layers of customer happiness data, those different metrics apply to different scopes of what a customer thinks. So some of them are essentially about what does a customer think about your company. Some of them are about a particular feature. Some of them are about a brand. And it's really hard to discern the data and therefore make it actionable. Another common pattern is customers are willing to share more about what doesn't work than what does. And you've certainly seen this in other areas. I mean, people like to express their frustrations more so than express praise sometimes. And as such, those specific metrics and a way to, to analyze it if you only look at this type of data, it sometimes over-indexes on what doesn't work and under-indexes on what does work. So it's a little bit challenging. And if I were to summarize what exactly is challenging with those metrics in a very simple way, I would say that they're like health, right? So I described a lot of layers of what is challenging about those metrics. But essentially, customer happiness is like health. So if you're trying to get healthy, you know that there are certain things that you need to do. You know that you probably should, eat healthy. You should probably sleep more. You should probably quit drinking and smoking. You cannot just do one of those things, but continue doing, things that deteriorate your health. But the problem is that at any given moment, if your customer happiness improves, it's really hard to attribute causation, right? So if you, again, compare this to your health tracker, if you, for example, start taking vitamins, then at the same time, if you start sleeping better and your health parameters improve, like your resting heart rate, for example, improves, you don't really know what caused that. You can guess that there are certain things that you're doing are somehow impacting you in a good way, but you don't really know which one is it. And that's another challenge with making customer happiness metrics actionable. Even if you realize how to move them, you still don't know exactly which little piece or which big piece that you did moved the needle. And so that is why causation is exceptionally hard to attribute in those situations. So clearly, the problem is there. And as I mentioned before, I really like to ask questions rather than trying to solve problems myself. So I'm very lucky to have an exceptional data science and analytics partner in Ramil, because I came to him with this problem and I said, hey, how do we use this customer happiness data? We have a lot of data points, but how can we actually convert it into a plan that is not only actionable and can scale and be used by multiple teams consistently, but also lets us focus on the most impactful improvements? So that was a problem, and Ramil was up for a challenge. Ramil, over to you.
Thank you, Natalia. Excuse me. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us here. So I'll take the time now to walk us through, When we got the problem, now we have to think about a methodology. And how I want to start initially is I want to introduce you to a very famous family. This is the nightshade family. As many of you might not know, a nightshade family is made up of many different plants. And some of them are the tomatoes and the potatoes. And like many families, I think we can all relate, we don't get along sometimes together, especially these two. They cannot live with one another. So basically, when you're planting these, you have to plant them 10 feet at least apart from each other for them to live. Opposite to this, let's think about our problem that we had. So let's think of the tomatoes as our customer happiness data, and let's think of the potatoes as our engagement data. So as those two can't live together, these two, we want them, previously, traditionally, they've been viewed in silos, so we want them to live together. So we want to view them holistically, to be able to actually gauge how happy our customers are and how can we improve this experience for our customers. And what we did, we wanted to embark on this journey to build a framework to bridge these two metrics together, these data points together, and see what we can do to actually impact the customer experience and make it better. So what we did, we came up with a hypothesis initially. So our hypothesis was that happy users are very engaged with our product, whereas unhappy users might not be as engaged with our product. And from my world, that totally made sense, because I work in the experience world in customer engagement data. And when we build new features, one of the metrics we use is adoption. So as customers love a specific feature, they might adopt to it, so they keep using it more. They use it and they use it more frequently. Whereas if we build features that users don't like, they simply will not use them. So that made sense, my hypothesis. But I was wrong in that hypothesis. In this scenario, when we looked at our customer happiness by engagement, we noticed that happy and unhappy customers were just as engaged at the same level as each other. That was totally shocking, but this was a good problem to have. So basically, we have a product, and we get feedback from our customers if they're happy or they're unhappy, and our happy and unhappy customers are just as engaged. So our problem is now, if we have customers there, how can we make them happy customers? So this compelled us to embark on the journey of looking at pattern instead of volume. There has to be simply something different where the happy customers are doing where our unhappy customers are not doing similar things. So this is where we moved on to what are some of their engagement patterns. So basically for Confluence, as Natalia mentioned, we have many different use cases. And in Confluence, when users visit our product, they simply like to create content. They create content for themselves individually to keep notes, meeting notes, roadmaps, and things like that. Or they create content to share it within their team or their organization, maybe about a cool project or something insightful that they worked on and they want to blast it out. They share it. And what the next use case is navigation. So basically, we built many navigation features within Confluence, one of them being page tree. So as you build content, you want to organize your content. Other users will use our navigation features to then navigate and find this content. And once they find the content, they want to consume it and read it. And once they read it, they want to react to it. So basically, we've built collaboration features there. There's emojis they can collaborate on and share their reaction on your page. They can comment on it, ask you questions. Natalia does that many times to my pages, asks a lot of questions. So that's a feedback that gets generated to me, and then that's how we work and get our work done. So once we broke it out into these broad types of jobs to be done pattern, we wanted to see what is the difference between these users. So we identified that happy and unhappy users have distinct engagement patterns. So basically, now we know that there's differences we're identifying within these when we break it out within these broad types. So basically, in this example, we can see that happy customers are doing well with creating content, collaborating on content, and reading content, but not doing so well, medium, on navigating content. So we've identified that as an area that we want to look into. Our main thing was looking at unhappy customers. So now we see for unhappy customers in this example, content creation and navigation are big issues. They're big blockers for them. So we know that there's some similarity here with navigation between happy and unhappy, and we want to double down and double click and look into what's causing this. Now we also know creation is an issue for them too. So once we go look at it at this level, this is at a high level, we want to peel the onion back and go deeper within this, right? What does this tell us, like, if we want to try to move in and see? So there was different patterns where we looked at here, where we segmented and cohorted our customer happiness metrics. We looked at tasks within jobs to be done. So basically, we identified some of the jobs to be done, like content creation or finding content. But within those, there's tasks we look at. So some users might want to create content, as I mentioned, for themselves or for their team or for their company. So those are some examples. We also identified some segments we could break it up by as device usage patterns. So Confluence being a product that people use to get their job done, we want to be able to reach many different platforms for our users so that they're able to see if I create a page and Natalia is looking for that information, Natalia might be on the move and she can view it on her mobile and it might get and she reacts to it on my page. This gets our work done quicker. So we looked at mobile versus desktop. We also break it up by cohorts. Cohorts, some of them are tenure. We do know that customers that start within their tenure and go on their journey within Confluence have their use case evolves and changes of how they use Confluence. So some new users might initially just create, where older 10-year users might just collaborate, comment on pages, or view pages. So we wanted to look at it in that cohort. And then segments. Atlassian and Confluence has many different customers, many different sizes. So we want to look at small versus large organizations, or by different license types. We offer our product for free users, there's paying users, and then there's premium users. They all have different use cases of how they use our product. They have different amount of content that they keep on our products. Or if navigation might be an issue for bigger customers, we do know that this might not be an issue for our smaller customers, because just by the sheer amount of content they might have, where they can easily find the content they're looking for and organizing it. And then, as Natalia mentioned, we work on the cloud offering of our product. So we also are going through migration of our server customers to our cloud customers. And the product and features look and feel different. So we want to ensure that this process is seamless as possible for these customers, so they're able to, and we want to be able to measure at every step their happiness and their engagement, see how it changes as they migrate over. So we want to break out our happiness metrics by that segment as well. So here's an example that is what we looked at. Basically, we're doing just an exercise here, a simple exercise on correlation, where we look at, here it's instance sizes we're looking at. So basically, you can see that for content creation, for 0 to 10 customers and 1,000 plus customers, content creation does well with our happy customers. So they're happy using those features in that area. But for our medium-sized customers, not so much. So we want to, that's an area of attention we want to look into. For collaboration, we could see that it's not doing well for our small customers, but it's doing well for our medium-size and doing average for our, there's some sort of correlation for our larger size. Reading content looks to be okay for everyone, so we could check that off. For navigation, we want to specifically now look into our small size customers here, or it could be a large size customer depending on content there, but here for small customer, it looks like navigation is not doing well. So this is an area that we've identified for what segments and what jobs to be done, which areas we want to focus on now, and we want to make that experience better for our users. So some of the key findings we had. Basically, what we've done is we've identified very granular engagement patterns for our users. For example, we know search success, out of the tasks we have, search success is an important one. We want to double down and make this experience better. We want to make our search results more relevant, because we do know that if users have a high success in finding the content they're looking for, they're usually very happy. This helps them get their job done. Mobile apps adoption, the example I mentioned. If we're able to collaborate on content on the go across devices, we do know those customers are really happy using our Confluence product. And then the other example I spoke about is breaking it out by segments. So we know that content creation matters for a lot for very small customers versus large instances. So small instances are really wanting to create content, and less so for our medium-sized customers. So now that we established which behaviors are important for our users, what do we do with this, right? So we know that healthy eating patterns lead to health. So we want to identify what are healthy things we can do for our users to create healthy users. And now, when we bring these findings to our product team and our partner, we want to see, based on these findings we have, how can we take this data and put it into action? So Natalia will speak about that.
Thank you, Mel. Yeah, so healthy eating, who doesn't like that? Like Ramil said, it was time to figure out what do we do with this. Because essentially, what Ramil and his team's analysis allowed us to do, it helped us understand and hypothesize about a projected impact of each capability and the impact that this capability is going to have on customer happiness, right? Now that we know that there are certain specific behaviors that seem to be highly correlated with user happiness, our question was, how do we create more of this behavior? How do we convince more users or create conditions in which more users will exhibit those behavior patterns? And even outside of product, what else can we do to drive those behaviors if we know that they ultimately correlate with success and happiness? So the way we approach this, first and foremost, is really trying to understand what does this set of insights that we got from Ramil and team mean in practicality. And this is a very good example where Ramil's perspective and analysis of behavior patterns actually allowed us to fill a gap in our previous product thinking and prioritization thinking. So for example, if you take a feature that recently rolled out in Confluence Cloud, page reactions, then if your decision-making framework is only, are customers asking for this feature, then the answer will be no, because that will not be something that will be featured in our qualitative feedback or happiness scoring that we've been collecting through for various surveys and various happiness metrics. It would not be something that would be featured on the Atlassian community or the website where folks ask us about improvements and capabilities. However, when we ask the next question, does this capability drive a behavior that actually contributes to that pattern that we have identified that highly correlates with customer happiness? The answer may be yes. And in this particular case, the answer was indeed yes. And that puts a very different perspective on how you plan your roadmap and how you try to prioritize impact. Because yes, you absolutely want to deliver against things that your customers are asking you about explicitly. But at the same time, if you only do that, that's not enough if you're trying to move the needle on the customer happiness score, because you need to be able to capture those false negatives. And Ramil's analysis essentially allowed us to capture those false negatives and convert them into a plan. So specifically, as we think about the implementation, how we took it from insights to the plan. And I think you've all just started realizing where I'm getting at, where I'm getting to from my previous slide. We basically tried to incorporate those findings and this data-driven approach into other things that we do. So the first thing that we worked on after we realized that those beneficial behavior patterns exist is we tried to put it into a very simple scoring model that allows our teams autonomously to look at the area that they own and actually make projections themselves. That means that our scoring model needed to be very, very simple, and Ramil partnered with a number of other data science and research teams across Atlassian to put together a very simple scoring model that allowed teams to do this. The second thing that we invested into, we made sure that we don't just take this new shiny prioritization tooling and only do that. We, of course, combined it in a meaningful way with other ways to prioritize customer feedback and impact, such as direct feedback, qualitative and quantitative user feedback inputs, things like frequency of usage and other parameters just to make the whole scoring model more robust. And then we invested a lot into the education because your data science findings and putting them into action can only happen if everybody, one, understands it, and two, actually knows how to use it and actually practices it, right? And so that is one aspect that logistically we really put a lot of effort into. But we made sure that once we have educated all the teams, then this engagement scoring based on Ramil's framework is actually incorporated into all of our prioritization rituals and planning processes. And the last thing, of course, we had to work on was Ramil and team provided instrumentation and templates that would allow us to test our hypothesis. Because again, now that we have this shiny new model, the question is, are we right? And can we actually trace the impact that we think that we're going to have? So that was exceptionally helpful and something that allowed us to track impact after we rolled it out. So what exactly have we learned? First, I'm going to give you an example of getting it right, where we realized that a feature is going to have a projected impact on customer happiness, even though traditional qualitative customer feedback did not indicate so. An example of such feature would be a rollout of Confluence's new homepage, which again, no customers asked for. However, because it contributed significantly to the behavior patterns that we knew were highly correlated with user happiness, it actually increased, and we were able to attribute that exactly, user happiness quite substantially. The reason why, if I put it in simple language, is that essentially it gives you more control about findability of the content that you create, and it also allows you to discover content from others easier, which are both behaviors that we realized are contributing to the user happiness by way of being correlated. But there were also things when we didn't get it right, and this would not be a good enough talk if we only spoke to the glory of our new methodology. One interesting example where we didn't capture the real impact was when one of our teams released a revamp of Confluence space settings, which is an admin-facing capabilities. And we missed this through our methodology because we didn't calculate the second-degree effect of it, and therefore we didn't estimate the impact of this capability as high. However, it was high because, like in most enterprise software capabilities, admins actually have a lot of influence on how well the software will be set up, and therefore can make lives of end users either miserable or very happy. And so in this case, we did not project enough of an impact because we didn't realize that second-degree effect that is going to have on the end users. However, it did, and that's a good example of how the methodology that we developed needs some improvement. If you're thinking about doing something like that, Ramil and I were thinking, what advice would we have for the teams who are thinking about a similar initiative? And our best advice is you have to really make sure that you allocate enough time. It really took us a few quarters from the inception to the actual rollout and teams starting using it. You have to have a really solid data set about customer happiness. Sometimes we speak with fellow data analytics managers and PMs, and they asked us, well, what if I don't have a useful customer happiness data? Well, what really allowed us to identify all of those patterns is the fact that we actually had a lot of data going back a few years on customer happiness. Make sure that you invest in education, and as you think about instrumentation and a way to kind of, again, validate your projections, make sure that you invest in that. And the last parting thought is what we found in our journey is, if we paraphrase Leo Tolstoy, we found that happy users are all alike, but every unhappy user is unhappy in their own way. And if Leo Tolstoy was a data science practitioner, I'm sure that he would agree with us. But sometimes, happiness is the same, but unhappiness is different. And with that, we will open up for questions. Thank you very much.
I think we have 1 minute left, but we can take one question.
How would you capture happiness early in the cycle if you don't actually have a lot of analytics or telemetry built into your system? What's the measure of some easy happiness measures to capture?
Great question. So the easiest way to do this is probably introduce, and there are actually even software tools to do that, basically an analytics layer software providers do that sometimes, that allows you to basically have a contextual survey. And if you place it strategically in your product, so basically in an area or on a page where basically there's a lot of traffic, then that is something that will give you an early data. It will not be perfect, but if you're just thinking about kicking it off, then this is probably the best way to kickstart it. There are multiple frameworks of, again, user happiness score, but something simple, on a scale of, scale from 0 to 10, how would you recommend this? And maybe just like a quick input for user qualitative feedback is probably a best bet. Ramil, what would you say?
No, I totally agree. Yeah, doing it that way, and also you would go into more advanced methodology that we've been using, but early on, probably gauging in product feedback from your users is the best way.
Yeah. Thank you.